The morning of October 12th, 1998, began like any other fall day in Lexington, Kentucky. The air was cold and fresh, with that unmistakable smell of autumn leaves rustling through the peaceful streets. Dawn edged over rooftops, bathing the town in gentle golden hues. But by 7:15 a.m., that typical Monday morning would be one the town of Lexington would never forget. Dispatch, we have a 1055 on Maple Creek Road. Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Detective Silas Merritt, a 15-year veteran of the Lexington Police Department, was slumped over the steering wheel of his patrol truck. The truck was parked on an isolated section of road, just 3 blocks from the station. A solitary bullet had entered the temple area. His service weapon remained in its holster. No struggle, no robbery evidence, just quiet, and the dead body of one of Lexington's finest detectives. It was a scene that would haunt the town for decades to come. A gruesome murder with no motive, no suspect, and no explanation. A crime that left a community questioning whether or not the killer was still out there, or worse, among them. For 22 years, the case of Merritt languished in the cold case files. His widow no longer received phone calls from detectives. His children grew up without answers to questions. The citizens of Lexington attempted to move forward, but some wounds never heal. Then in 2020, everything changed. A ballistics advance exposed a secret no one anticipated, a connection between the bullet that murdered Detective Merritt and a gun found years later. And when the arrest was ultimately made, it didn't merely stun Lexington, its reverberations shook police stations nationwide. Because the officer who pulled the trigger wasn't a professional thief or a conspiratorial suspect from Merritt's past. It was another cop, a man who had been at Merritt's funeral, who had supported his mourning family, who had even assisted in investigating his murder. Before we delve into this knotty web of corruption, betrayal, and the abuse of power, take a second to click that subscribe button and enable notifications. Here we delve into the most captivating true crime stories that tend to go under the radar for the media. And believe me, you won't want to be left in the dark about this one. This is a tale of how the very system created to serve and protect us sometimes conceals its deepest secrets, of how a killer sported a badge for over 2 decades, and how justice, though long overdue, finally caught up, in a manner no one in Lexington could have ever foreseen. Have you ever resided in one of those small towns where everyone knows everybody? Where you see the same faces at the supermarket, the post office, or your children's Little League games? Let us know in the comments below. Because in Lexington, that sort of tight-knit familiarity made what occurred next even more difficult to believe. The monster this town was afraid of wasn't hiding in the dark. He was standing right alongside them during the daytime. Detective Silas Merritt was not merely one more face on the police force. He was the type of cop everybody knew. Merritt, 42, had earned a spotless reputation during his career. Stable, consistent, and just. He came directly onto the force from college. A native Lexington boy who'd played quarterback for Lexington High and later received a criminal justice degree at the University of Kentucky. By 30, he was already a detective, known for his calm demeanor and relentless pursuit of the truth. Silas didn't just see cases, he saw people, said Captain Robert Harden, who supervised him for nearly a decade. Victims weren't just file numbers to him. He carried their stories home. The Merritts were a mainstay of the Lexington community. Silas and his wife, Maria, were high school sweethearts, one of those couples everyone knew was going to make it. They had 3 children, Michael, 16, Sarah, 14, and Danny, 11. The Merritts resided in a small 2-story house on Sycamore Drive, where weekends were spent having backyard barbecues, watching Little League games, and the type of laughter that made a neighborhood seem like family. Everybody knew Silas, said Diane Powell, who owns the town's diner where he ordered coffee every day. He was more than a cop. He was part of the pulse of this town. He was not the type of man who would nod politely and go away. Silas Merritt recalled your children's names, inquired about your mom's well-being, and had a way of making you feel as though your life was important to him. He was not merely a cop. He was part of the same fabric that kept Lexington intact. But what really distinguished Detective Merritt within the department wasn't his warmth or sense of community. It was his integrity. Silas was known to be a straight shooter. the type of man who'd rather lose friends than lose his ethical standards. In 1996, he'd spearheaded an internal inquiry into mishandling of evidence that had resulted in two officers resigning. That kind of action didn't exactly make him popular with everybody, but it did gain him profound respect from those who felt that things should be done the correct way. Later on, he'd been collaborating with a DEA task force on a suspected drug trafficking ring, one that rumor had it possibly involved individuals in high office, perhaps even local authorities. Silas was old school, said retired officer Tom Kendall. He thought wearing that badge was holy. If you weren't holding to that, he didn't care who you were. He'd call you on it. The day he was murdered, Silas had been set to meet with the district attorney at 9 a.m. At 11:42 p.m. the previous night, he'd placed an 8-minute call to DA Richard Simmons. Simmons informed investigators that Silas told him he needed to talk about something important, something big. But Silas wouldn't reveal what it was. The crime scene itself only fueled the mystery. It was Officer Patricia Ramirez who had originally noticed Merritt's patrol truck that morning as she drove by on her route. Tucked in neatly along Maple Creek Road, a secluded, tree-lined street of neat houses, it seemed utterly benign at first glance. But this was nowhere near Merritt's usual beat, and he had no ongoing cases anywhere around there. The first police report stated the truck was parked as if on purpose, rather than having been left in a rush. The engine was not running, doors were locked, seatbelt was unbuckled. There was no evidence of a struggle, no shattered glass, no forced entry. The shot itself was cold in its exactness. One bullet to the right temple, shot close range from a medium-caliber handgun. The medical examiner would confirm that Merritt had been killed instantly, between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., hours before his body was discovered. His service revolver stayed holstered. His wallet still contained $43, plus his credit cards. His watch and wedding ring hadn't been removed. But there was one tiny detail that raised eyebrows. His police radio was on, but tuned to the incorrect channel. And those who knew Silas swore he would never make that error. When the crime scene unit went over the truck, there were only Merritt's own prints on the steering wheel and door handle. Nothing more. No partial prints where there ought to have been some. As if someone had taken care to wipe the whole thing clean. No shell casings, no gun. Just one mutilated .40 caliber bullet recovered during autopsy, too deformed to be matched with the forensic equipment of 1998. News of Merritt's death spread through Lexington like fire. By lunchtime, flowers blanketed the police station steps. Within 48 hours, over 2,000 residents, nearly a quarter of the town, attended a candlelight vigil in the square. "This community is stunned," Mayor Thomas Graham announced at a news conference the next day. "Detective Merritt was the best of our town and the best of our police department. We will not rest until his murderer is brought to justice." Within the department, there was fervor, but not universally. On the outside, it was outrage and resolve. 8 detectives were assigned to the case by Chief Raymond Parker, and assistance was requested from the Kentucky State Police. There was a $50,000 reward posted in nearly record time. But in private, rumors started. Why had Merritt been there that evening? What was he working on that would have earned him a death sentence? Some of the officers said he'd seemed distant the past few weeks, more withdrawn, less forthcoming about what he was up to. Silas was playing it close to his chest, confessed Detective Marcus Sullivan, his 3-year partner. It was like he was on to something, but didn't know who to trust. Silas had been putting in late hours a lot in those last few weeks. Too late, in the opinion of some of his fellow officers. He'd begun making calls from payphones rather than the station, and that had raised more than a few eyebrows. When Sullivan, his partner, questioned him about it, Silas waved it off. "Some cases require a little extra caution," he told him. It was the sort of evasive response that only made Sullivan all the more nervous. They quickly pieced together Merritt's last few hours. He had departed the station at 10:15 p.m. on October 11th. Security cameras saw him walk alone to his patrol vehicle, tucking one arm under the other and carrying a manila folder, a folder that would never be discovered. There were no calls at home after his late-night talk with the district attorney at 11:42 p.m. His wife, Maria, related to detectives that he'd texted her around 10:30 p.m., that he had to follow up on something and would be in late. That wasn't out of the norm. Silas tended to lose track of time when he was working on a case. She'd gone to bed before midnight and didn't hear him come in. The absence of witnesses was one of the most infuriating things about the case. This was a quiet, residential neighborhood, yet not a single neighbor had reported hearing a gunshot. No suspicious vehicles had been observed. Security cameras at surrounding businesses were either off for the night or pointing the wrong way. "It's like the crime of the century," Detective Sullivan said in a 3-week-old case review. "No witnesses, no evidence, no motive. Whoever committed it knew exactly what they were doing and how to leave it spotless." By December of 1998, detectives had interviewed 122 individuals, family members, co-workers, previous suspects, and neighbors close to Maple Creek Road. They'd served 17 search warrants, reviewed all open and shut cases Merritt had ever worked on, even his personal email and phone records. But for all their work, they were no further along on the case than they'd been on day one. Next was a letter from Captain Robert Harden, one of the department's finest officers. It was never intended to be seen by the public. In it, he said, "The most chilling possibility is that this wasn't random or an act of revenge. The precision, the cleanup, the complete absence of traceable evidence, it all has the earmarks of a professional hit, or worse, someone with law enforcement training." That peaceful, unimaginable speculation, that one of their own was perhaps involved, would linger over the department for years like a storm cloud nobody cared to recognize. But without evidence to support it, it was nothing more than that, a shadowy suspicion shared in hallways and middle-of-the-night briefings. By October's end, the Merritt case had grown into Lexington's largest. Chief Raymond Parker established a special task force, converting the department's primary conference room into a war room. Walls were covered with photos, timelines, and maps. Pinboards linked suspects to case files with strings crisscrossing like a spiderweb. The first assignment was straightforward. Find anyone who may have had reason to want Detective Merritt killed. Whenever an officer gets killed, particularly a cop like Silas, you begin by examining the folks he locked up, said Lieutenant Daniel Harrison, who led the task force. And Silas had plenty of folks he'd locked up and ticked off. Marcus Delgado was listed first, a convicted drug dealer Merritt had assisted in putting behind bars in 1995. Delgado was released from prison only 3 months earlier for the murder, when, according to his cellmate, he vowed to make Merritt pay someday. When police discovered Delgado residing in Louisville, some 80 miles from the scene, he did not have a solid alibi. But cell tower records later revealed his phone had remained in Louisville throughout the night. Nonetheless, he was a person of interest for several months. There was Raymond Tate, too, a one-time cadet in the police academy. He'd been kicked out years ago when Merritt had accused him of cheating on his qualify exams. Tate had accused Merritt of destroying his dream career, and, neighbors said, would frequently mention the detective's name during his inebriated tirades. But the night the murder took place, Tate was on an overnight shift at a factory down the street, and several colleagues attested to it. The investigators also investigated Carl Hoffman, a brother to a victim of domestic violence whose case had been dealt with by Merritt years earlier. Carl Hoffman had initially appeared to be a promising suspect. Only 6 months earlier, he'd clashed with Merritt at the courthouse, outraged that his sister's attacker had been released on bail. The fight became so intense that courthouse security had to step in. But when police delivered the news of Merritt's murder, Hoffman was shaken. He even offered to take a polygraph test, which he passed without blinking. "Eyes down every avenue, no matter how unlikely," recalled Detective Melissa Jordan, a veteran member of the task force. Old suspects, resentful informants, upset family members, co-workers with axes to grind, you name them. If there was a possibility someone might have it in for Silas, we pursued it. By the end of December, the team had administered 12 polygraph tests, executed 23 search warrants, and taken DNA samples from 16 people. None of it matched the limited trace evidence in Merritt's patrol truck. It was as if they were chasing ghosts. And then, a faint light of hope, what appeared to be the first genuine break in months. A university student by the name of Brady Thompson stepped forward. He said he'd been walking across Maple Creek Road at midnight on the night of the killing and noticed a tall figure in black standing next to a police car. At first, he appeared believable, Lieutenant Harrison remembered. He provided information about the street that hadn't been released to the public. His timing was perfect in our window of death. With Thompson, investigators created a composite drawing of the enigmatic man. It was distributed to Lexington and the outlying counties. For 3 consecutive weeks, the drawing monopolized the local press. Tips came in by the dozens. People believed they had spotted that man at the supermarket, the filling station, even a church picnic. But the thrill was short-lived. As questions pressed Thompson for details, things began to crack. His identification of the vehicle failed to correspond with Merritt's truck. His memory of what the man wore changed every time he recounted the story. Ultimately, after a series of interviews, Thompson confessed. He had fabricated it all in response to hearing about the reward money. That false lead cost us over 200 man-hours, Harrison growled. Time and energy we could not spare to lose. While that was taking place, forensic analysis on the bullet found in Merritt's body wasn't providing much assistance either. It was a .40 caliber, the same used in millions of handguns, particularly by law enforcement. Ballistics specialists concluded that it probably was fired from a Glock or one similar, which put it down to just about everybody with a badge. But one aspect of the autopsy gave investigators a chill. The weapon had been discharged from a mere 2 inches away, close enough to indicate the killer was perhaps inside the truck or even leaning straight through the window. And there was no evidence of forced entry. That could mean only one thing. Either Merritt admitted his murderer himself, Captain Hardin wrote in an internal report, or he was surprised by someone whom he had no cause to distrust. This discovery prompted investigators to take a closer eye at Merritt's recent activity. During the 6 months leading up to his death, he'd requested an odd amount of items from the evidence room, namely files of old drug case files dated 1992 to 1994. The records indicated that he checked out 17 in all. 14 were subsequently discovered neatly in his desk drawer. The remaining 3 were gone. Whatever it was Silas had been investigating, he'd been doing it under the radar. 2 under the radar. When the detectives went through his desk, home office, and locker, they discovered not a single one of the detailed notes he was famous for. His personal computer had been wiped clean days before he died, using Level Pro software. Silas was smart about tech, so there was a chance he'd wiped it himself. But the timing wasn't reassuring. What had he deleted, and why? As the investigators attempted to reconstruct his last few hours, they found one more crumb. Security cameras at a convenience store revealed Merritt at 10:30 p.m., purchasing a cup of coffee. That's it. His trail went cold. In between when Silas Merritt was last spotted and when his body was discovered the following morning, he had appeared to have disappeared into thin air. His phone records provided one eerie lead, a final outgoing call at 11:38 p.m. to a prepaid cell phone that had never previously been used or used again. The call lasted 4 minutes and 26 seconds. That mysterious phone, as investigators later discovered, had been bought with cash at a Walmart in neighboring Scott County 2 weeks earlier. Unfortunately, by the time they traced the purchase, the store's security footage had already been overwritten. Making that phone call is the smoking gun, Detective Melissa Jordan declared in an early 1999 task force meeting. Silas makes this burner phone call, and an hour later, he's dead. He was enticed out onto Maple Creek Road by the person on the other end of that phone. But the question really was who he called, and why. 3 months into the probe, that question still troubled the team. The formerly crowded task force room was now filled with frustration and exhaustion. Leads had evaporated. The budget for overtime was exhausted. Media coverage, which had been intense in the opening days, started to dwindle. The reward fund that had inspired so many tips now was nothing but an incentive for false leads and wild goose chases. "We're missing something," Lieutenant Harrison told his weary team during what would become one of their last briefings. Silas was working on something big, something he didn't trust to go through official channels. Whatever it was, it got him killed. By April 1999, the task force itself had been officially disbanded. Only Jordan and Harrison were left to pursue the case during their off-duty hours. By the first anniversary of Merritt's death, it had been relegated to monthly review status, and by 2001, it was officially called cold. Maria Merritt, who had been a familiar presence at the precinct, slowly ceased visiting for news. Her once forceful voice grew softer with every unanswered question. The yearly memorial service that had previously attracted hundreds dwindled to family and a few old friends. The toughest thing wasn't losing Silas, Maria would say to a reporter on the case's 10th anniversary. It was seeing the world forget him, seeing the case dwindle like he never happened. The detectives who had invested their hearts in the case were left with a wound that never fully closed when the murder of one of their own remained unsolved. In our business, you take that some cases don't get solved, Detective Jordan said, displaying a framed photo of Merritt on her desk until she retired in 2015. But not this one, not Silas. Somewhere out there, someone got away with murdering a cop. And worse, they've gotten to live with that secret for years. Little did she ever realize the truth was much nearer and much more horrifying than anyone could have ever envisioned. Before I explain to you how this flawless crime ultimately collapsed after over 2 decades, take a split second to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It actually helps keep these forgotten cases alive and allows me to tell cases that may otherwise be left behind in dusty old file cabinets. Also, I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I'm always amazed by how these stories connect people across time zones and generations. All right, let's head back to Lexington, Kentucky, where the Merritt case was about to slip into a deep, 20-year hibernation. When the new millennium arrived, the tale of Detective Silas Merritt's murder continued to recede onto the local legend shelf, the kind of sad rumor parents passed on after their children were in bed. The former busy task force office was converted into storage space. The hotline phone that had been constantly ringing was eventually put out of commission. Even the email tip line, which had been flooded with messages, was quietly rerouted to a general cold case inbox, one that few detectives had time to scan. For Lexington residents, the loss of Detective Merritt inflicted an invisible scar. The easy small-town feeling of security they had long taken for granted was lost. You could see it in little ways, said Reverend Michael Collins, who had officiated Merritt's funeral. Pause for emphasis. Folks began locking their doors sooner. They gave twice looks to patrol cars that drove up on their block. It was as if trust itself had been shaken. Lexington residents began to alter their habits following the murder of Detective Merritt in modest but revealing ways. Doors that had previously remained open were now locked up before dark. Parents watched their kids a little more tightly, and neighbors who used to greet each other from their front porches suddenly appeared a little more reserved. There was this unspoken fear, recalled one longtime resident. If someone could kill a detective and walk away, what chance did the rest of us have? Local restaurants that used to bust late into the night started closing sooner. The park along Maple Creek Road, where Merritt's body was discovered, received fewer visitors every year. Later, the city attempted to revitalize it with flashlights and surveillance cameras. But no matter what, to everyone in town it would forever be known as Merritt Park. Not as a memorial, but as a painful reminder. Ripple effects extended far beyond fear. Town council meetings became heated arguments over safety and responsibility. Citizens called for more patrols, more money, more information. By the time Lexington constructed its new police station in 2005, they ensured that they added a memorial wall to the front lobby, Merritt's badge and photo center stage. It was like the case became a part of who we were, said Elaine Davis, a Lexington High School history teacher. Year after year, when I taught local history, my students would bring it up. They were children who weren't even born when it occurred. But they knew the story. Everyone did. For the Merritts, however, the passing years provided a more profound kind of pain, the hurt of not knowing. Maria Merritt, who had been a bright, familiar smile at local functions, started backing away after the second anniversary of her husband's assassination. She slipped back into teaching at Lexington Elementary in secret, but asked for a transfer to third grade. It had just become too painful to work with fifth graders, the same age her youngest son had been when Silas had been murdered. My mom transformed, reported Michael Merritt, 16, when his dad was killed. In an unusual 2010 interview, he explained how the trauma persisted. She was forever searching, forever wondering if she'd see the killer on the street. Every anniversary, every birthday, every Christmas without Dad, it was like losing him all over again. Only this time, with the added agony of not knowing who. All three Merritt children dealt with the situation in their own manner. Michael went into law enforcement like his dad, graduating from the police academy in 2004. But he joined the Louisville Police Department, not Lexington's. "I couldn't walk down those same halls knowing Dad's killer could still be there," he said. The middle child, Sarah, made a different choice, getting a law degree and eventually becoming the youngest. Danny had the most difficulty. School problems resulted in a brief incarceration in juvenile detention and a lengthy recovery. He eventually found meaning as a counselor for substance abuse. Dad's case was always there, Sarah afterwards thought. It was like this ghost that haunted us everywhere. Each of us had to decide if we were going to run from it or pursue it. I pursued. The Merritts, to a certain extent, found themselves becoming investigators themselves. Maria transformed a whole room in their home into what the children referred to as the Silas room. Every inch was filled with notes, newspaper articles, and letters to detectives. She taped TV segments, stored letters away, even printed out online forum dialogue when the internet era came along. Every year, she'd call the Lexington Police Department on the anniversary of her husband's death to inquire if there were any updates. Eventually, her calls got straight through to the cold case unit. Mrs. Merritt never gave up, Detective Jordan remembered, staying in contact with the family even after she left the department. Every year around Christmas time, she'd send a card to the precinct that read the same thing. "Please remember Silas." Jordan stopped. As if we ever could forget, the Merritts didn't simply keep the memory alive. They channeled their grief into action. They established the Silas Merritt Memorial Scholarship at the local community college for criminal justice students. They held annual fundraisers to increase the reward fund, $125,000 by 2010. And when the police department budget of limited means couldn't afford expert testing, the family funded private forensic analysis themselves, refusing to let the case die. In the meantime, the Lexington Police Department itself was evolving. The unsolved killing of one of its own left an indelible mark that transformed the force from top to bottom. Chief Parker retired in 2001 and was replaced by Deputy Chief James Thornton, a man who had previously patrolled the same streets as Silas. And it wouldn't take long before Thornton's leadership and the relentless determination of the Merritt family would bring new life to a case everyone thought was dead and gone. When James Thornton became police chief, he knew the department could not proceed without learning from what occurred to Detective Merritt. One of his initial actions as chief was implementing wide-ranging reforms, novel partner procedures, improved car tracking devices, and more stringent accountability overall. Silas's death revealed true weaknesses in the way we were doing business. Thornton told a swearing-in crowd, "No officer should ever have been so alone as he was that night." Those remarks established a tone for what was to become an effort of years to rebuild procedure and trust. And in 2003, an internal affairs audit caused further humiliation for the department. In the Merritt case, investigators found that three critical pieces of evidence, a coffee cup, a notebook, and Merritt's personal cellular phone, had been inappropriately stored, risking their integrity. The responsible technician, Roy Simmons, was officially reprimanded. The audit discovered no evidence of foul play, but the damage was done. It appeared sloppy, and in an already taint-tinged case with rumors of inside involvement, that sloppiness fueled the rumor mill. The scandal prompted a total remake of the evidence management system. The antiquated paper-filled storage room was stripped down and redone with digital barcoding, security cameras, and restricted access. "We had to restore trust," said Captain Lisa Winters, who oversaw the modernization effort, "not just with the public, but with our own people. When detectives start doubting each other, that kind of suspicion eats a department from the inside out." With time, Lexington's police department also went through a change of faces. Only 6 officers remained by 2018 who had known Silas Merritt personally. The others had retired, transferred, or simply moved away. The younger officers learned of Merritt the way future generations learn about legends, from classroom slides, training modules, and the yearly memorial service in his memory. "To us newer guys, Merritt was mythical," said Sergeant Kevin Rodriguez, who came onto the force in 2010. "His case was this cautionary story, A combination of respect, mystery, and fear. Every time we went over it in class, someone would ask the question no one wanted to voice out loud. Was the killer still here with us? That horrid question took on fresh urgency as forensic science started moving faster than anyone could have envisioned. In the late 90s, DNA testing was restricted, costly, and failed with compromised samples. Yet by the early 2000s, fresh methods enabled investigators to recover usable DNA from even minimal traces. Skin cells, clothing fibers, or fingerprints left on contact. When the Kentucky State Police launched their Advanced Cold Case Unit in 2008, the Merritt case was one of the first files pulled off the shelf. For the first time in a decade, there was real hope. And sure enough, that hope delivered something, however faint. Technicians also discovered trace DNA on the steering wheel of Merritt's truck. The sample had been present all along, but was too weak to be picked up by the 1998 lab equipment. Unfortunately, it was also too degraded for a complete profile, like viewing just the fringes of a fingerprint, but not quite enough to know whose it belonged to. Even so, it proved one thing. Somebody else had been riding in Merritt's car the night he was murdered. Meanwhile, ballistics technology was breaking its own ground. The development of the Integrated Ballistics Identification System, IBIS, revolutionized tracing firearms. By 2012, the IBIS database had entered millions of guns from around the nation, enabling investigators to compare bullets and shell casings from legacy cases electronically with new ones. It provided detectives with a never-before-seen tool, a type of forensic time machine. At roughly the same period, digital forensics became a new frontier. Machines previously regarded as useless suddenly became treasure chests of concealed information. That's when experts returned to Merritt's broken cell phone, which had been botched years ago. With today's recovery software, they were able to retrieve pieces of erased text messages from the phone's memory. Messages that had just been erased hours before Silas's death. A partial message that was sent to a mysterious number brought investigators up short. Confirm what we suspected. Need to meet the usual place. Midnight. That message was intriguing, added Detective Melissa Jordan, who had joined the cold case unit by then. It informed us Silas was investigating something off the radar, something he didn't feel comfortable to go through official channels. But we didn't know who he forwarded it to. Without that, we were at a loss. But then there came another unlikely friend, the emergence of social media. When Merritt was murdered in 1998, Facebook and Twitter were not even concepts. But by the mid-2000s, they were mighty weapons in the arsenals of cold case detectives. Posts might reach witnesses who'd long since relocated, or awaken memories in individuals who hadn't given the case a thought in decades. And one of those posts, a routine-sounding Facebook posting about Detective Merritt's anniversary, would soon revive the case in a manner no one could have anticipated. The department had grown accustomed to relying on new gadgets. And by the mid-2000s, social media was one of its strongest. Each year, on the anniversary of Detective Merritt's death, Lexington PD would make a virtual plea requesting fresh information. Those messages reached thousands, well beyond city borders, reigniting interest in a case many believed had disappeared into myth. In most years, those appeals yielded the usual batch of vague leads, long dormant memories, drunken confessions, or the occasional conspiracy theory. But in 2017, something new came. One anonymous internet tip painted a picture of Merritt having an argument with another cop outside a storage complex only 2 days prior to his killing. The tip contained specific information that had never been disclosed. What Merritt was dressed in, the make and model of his car, even a mention of his missing manila folder. That sort of insider information put instant credibility into the tip. Detectives attempted everything to get in touch with the submitter, but whoever it was disappeared just as suddenly as they'd appeared. The storage facility itself was useless. It had been sold twice since the late 90s, and any surveillance tapes from back in the day were lost forever. However, it was the first lead in years that caused detectives to sit up and take notice. By 2019, the Merritt case had been reopened, closed, and reopened so many times that it had almost become a joke among fatigued detectives. Others viewed it as jinxed, uncrackable by nature. Every potential suspect had been ruled out or had perished. Every bit of evidence had been analyzed and reanalyzed. Witnesses had moved away or died. 21 years is a lifetime in homicide work, declared Dr. Rebecca Torres, a forensic scientist who was interviewed for a 2019 documentary about unsolved Kentucky murders. Memories get lost, evidence deteriorates, and even technology has its limits. Statistically, a case like that should remain cold forever. But Lexington was soon to discover statistics don't always paint the complete picture. Occasionally, it only requires a single lost piece of evidence, one tenacious reporter, or one entirely new scientific discovery to burst open decades of complacency. January 2020 crept in softly to Lexington. To everyone except perhaps the Lyles, the Merritt case had faded into the din of the past. The department continued to send out its annual press release, the same form they'd been using for years, only now with a fresh reward amount, $150,000. But fate was already changing behind the scenes. Enter Detective Allison Reed, the youngest and newest member of the three-member cold case squad. Officially, she was tasked with a string of 2010 robberies that had gone unsolved. Bland cases with living victims and a readily available chain of physical evidence. Unofficially, however, Reed had an obsession she couldn't leave behind. "I was raised in Lexington," she said in an interview later on. "The Merritt case was our ghost story around town. My dad was a patrolman at the time. I remember the day he came home, pale as a ghost, and said, 'Someone killed Silas.' It shook everybody. Even as a child, I could sense that. It was curiosity that began to drive her." Reed spent her nights sorting through dusty old files, reading dated reports stored in archives, and looking over pictures that had spent decades sitting untouched. And then, one February evening in 2020, she received her big break through pure happenstance. At a regional law enforcement conference in Nashville, Reed attended a session led by Dr. Marcus Whitman, a ballistics expert from the FBI's Quantitative Analysis Unit. His presentation introduced a cutting-edge technique called topographic bullet identification, or TBI. "Regular ballistics relies on what the human eye is able to detect," Whitman said to the audience. "Even with a microscope, we are not able to see microscopic striations. But TBI creates 3D models at the microscopic level. It catches every groove, every blemish. We can match bullets to guns with precision that was not even possible 5 years ago." Reed's ears had perked up. Afterwards, she went to Whitman, introduced herself, and explained Lexington's decades-long enigma, the Merritt case, the sole ruined .40 caliber bullet, the one that had eluded all the experts since 1998. Whitman grinned knowingly. He already knew the case. "It's in our training slides," he confessed. "We use it as an example of the limitations of old forensic equipment." Then he hesitated, regarding her for a moment before continuing. "Bring me the bullet. No guarantees, but this is just the type of case TB I was designed for." In Lexington, Reed's enthusiasm ran up against a wall called bureaucracy. The Merritt evidence was kind of sacred, sealed, cataloged, and locked away. Getting it out for off-site analysis required several approvals, culminating in Chief Anthony Davis himself. When she presented it in his office, he raised an eyebrow. "You want to remove our only physical evidence," he said slowly, "and transport it to Quantico?" His tone made it clear. She'd need one compelling argument to make that happen. Chief Davis leaned back in his chair, eyeing Detective Reed with a look that was equal parts caution and curiosity. "You're talking about evidence that's been examined by every ballistics expert in Kentucky for over 2 decades, he said slowly. Reed didn't bat an eyelash. "Respectfully, sir, not with this technology. TBI didn't even become a thing until 2018, and field offices didn't get access to it last year." Davis agonized over the decision for 2 long weeks. He consulted with the Merritt family, considered the risks, and ultimately signed off. The bullet, the lone, delicate strand that could still be linked to Merritt's killer, would be shipped to Quantico. In early March 2020, Reed made the journey herself, personally delivering the evidence to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. The new topographic scan took under 6 hours. Employing TBI, Dr. Marcus Whitman's team developed a highly detailed 3D model of the bullet, showing microscopic ridges, scratches, and tool marks that are not visible with the naked eye. The preliminary results seemed promising, but there was a catch. To determine the gun that had been used to shoot it, they had to match those distinctive marks to the FBI's huge database of known firearms. That's where we ran into the wall, Reed later described. The database contained millions of entries. There was no assurance the killer's firearm was even in the database. We had to limit the field. Way down. Reed back in Lexington came up with what her colleagues jokingly referred to as her ballistic census. Her plan was as ambitious as it was contentious. All active and retired Lexington police officers would be requested to voluntarily surrender their firearms, both service and personal, for test firing and TBI analysis. Her reasoning was straightforward. If Merritt had been killed by someone within law enforcement, as many had long suspected, the weapon of choice could still be waiting in a gun safe somewhere, registered to an officer who never gave it a second thought. The response within the department was swift and split. The police union protested immediately, citing privacy issues. Some of the officers accused Reed of overreaching her authority. Others muttered that it was all a publicity stunt, a young detective seeking to make a name for herself using a dead man's case. Reed stood firm. "Here's where I have to ask a quick favor," she told the audience in one of her later interviews. "If you're finding this in-depth look at one of America's most puzzling cold cases worthwhile, please subscribe. I invest hundreds of hours assembling these stories, and your support keeps that labor going." Now back to the story. In spite of the resistance, Chief Davis supported her. He asserted that, while attendance was theoretically optional, saying no could leave some uncomfortable questions unanswered. To lead by example, Davis and the command staff were the first to turn in their guns for testing. That act diffused everything. In 3 weeks, 87% of on-duty officers had done the same. Their service pistols and private handguns recorded, discharged, and tested by the FBI. Every groove, every bullet, every casing was matched with the Merritt bullet. Outcome, not a match. Undaunted, Reed branched out to retired officers. That segment proved more difficult. Some had moved away or died. Others had sold their guns or passed them down to relatives. Yet by May 2020, another 200 or so guns had been tested. Again, nothing. "I started to think we'd been chasing the wrong theory," Reed admitted. "Maybe it wasn't a cop after all. Maybe we just wasted months and goodwill on the wrong lead." Then out of nowhere came the discovery that would flip everything on its head. Maria Merritt, digging through her late husband's effects to donate to the police museum, discovered a small, worn notebook hidden within the lining of an old briefcase. Its pages were for the most part cryptic, filled with initials, shorthand scribbles, and what appeared to be codes or references to cases. But one page was different: DS Glock SN WTF 1194. The DS initials drew Reed's attention straight away. DS stood for Daniel Slater, Lieutenant Daniel Slater, one of the Lexington PD's most respected veterans. Slater had served 31 years, retiring with full honors in 2012. And, more unsettlingly, he had been a lead investigator on the original Merritt Task Force back in 1998, a cop investigating his own colleague's murder, while possibly tied to it himself. When Reed looked into department records, she discovered Slater did own a Glock 23, and that he had reported it stolen in 1997, a single year prior to Merritt's death. Slater told the report that the firearm was stolen during a home burglary when he was on vacation. It was a clean, neat story, a bit too neat, and for the first time in decades, the Merritt investigation was going to become very, very real. Detective Reed gazed at the lab report silently for a long moment before releasing a single, shaken breath. Slater. Her theory had been correct. Merritt had stumbled upon something he was never supposed to have seen, and had scribbled down the one clue that would eventually lead his killer to be brought to justice. Merritt had somehow linked Slater to something suspicious, Reed later said to investigators. He traced the serial number of a gun that allegedly no longer existed. That wasn't coincidental. It was a warning. Reed's next move was verification. Reed filed a query with the National Firearms Tracing Center, requesting if the Glock that was registered to Lieutenant Daniel Slater, serial number WTF1194, ever saw the light of day again. The response came back bright and chill. No record found. The gun had never been recovered, sold, or deployed in any other known crime. But now, thanks to that notebook, Reed had likely cause. On May 29, 2020, detectives arrived at Lakeside Pines Retirement Community, a quiet property overlooking a reservoir about 40 miles from Lexington. Slater, now 68, answered the door himself. His reaction was measured, a flicker of confusion, quickly replaced by the calm professionalism of a man who had once conducted hundreds of searches himself. "Of course," he said evenly. "You're welcome to look." The first sweep came up empty. No secret weapons, no corruption evidence, not even a speeding citation in his recent past. Slater insisted his Glock was stolen in 1997 and was surprised that Merritt had taken down its serial number. "I always figured that gun would surface sometime," he said. Then day two. While cataloging Slater's lakeside property, an FBI technician saw something amiss with the boat dock. One of the support posts appeared newer than the rest. Different wood grain, different bolts. When struck, it yielded a hollow thud. Once a section of the post was removed, investigators found a sealed concrete core encased in waterproof plastic. Inside, a Glock 23. The serial number? The same gun Slater had stated was stolen, and the same amount noted by Merritt 22 years prior. The gun was quickly shipped to Quantico. In a matter of days, Dr. Whitman's team finished the TBI analysis. The results were conclusive. The microscopic striations on the bullet taken from Detective Merritt's body compared to the microscopic striations produced by test firings of Slater's Glock with 99.8% certainty. Whitman testified, "In my professional judgment, there is no reasonable doubt this is the gun which murdered him." On June 8, 2020, Lieutenant Daniel Slater was charged and arrested for first-degree murder. The news exploded through Lexington like a bomb. Not only had a decorated officer killed one of his own, but he had also headed the investigation into the crime he committed. Chief Davis stood grim-faced at the press conference. He was there with us. He went to memorials. He supported the Merritt family, all while he knew the truth. The extent of that betrayal is difficult to grasp. The evidence against Slater grew quickly. Forensic accountants found more than $200,000 in undeclared deposits between 1996 and 1998, an unachievable amount on a police wage. Digital forensics pulled deleted emails between Slater and known drug traffickers, establishing that Slater had been providing them with intel and cover. And then the most incriminating finding of all, agents searched Slater's hunting land and discovered a waterproof container buried outside an outbuilding. Inside, they found Merritt's missing notebook and his cell phone, each painstakingly sealed and protected. The notebook included detailed notations for a conspiracy in the department, references to controlled shipments, falsified reports, and internal cover-ups. Chief Davis epitomized it sternly. Detective Merritt discovered corruption within our ranks. He was set to reveal it. For that, he paid with his life. Police reconstructed the evening of October 11, 1998. Merritt had planned to meet Slater by Maple Creek Road, probably to confront him or give him an opportunity to confess. Slater ambushed him instead. He utilized his understanding of police protocol, set up the scene to appear as if it were a robbery, cleaned the vehicle, and took away evidence before backup was on scene. Then for over 2 decades, he coexisted with Merritt's family, visiting anniversaries, comforting Maria, shaking hands with Merritt's children. "The audacity is what's really astonishing," Reed said. "He didn't merely conceal himself. He acted innocence. He stood by Merritt's grave every year, vowing to track down the killer, full well knowing it was him." The disclosure stunned the Lexington Police Department. Police who had worked alongside Slater couldn't reconcile the image of the soft-spoken, dependable lieutenant with the beast under the badge. Community trust, which was already tenuous since the 1990s, was shaken to its foundation. Town hall forums filled with tears and rage. "How could this have happened?" one resident asked. "If you can't trust the badge, who can you trust?" Even Reed, the case's hero, conceded sleepless nights. "Would I have suspected someone within the department?" she said in a subsequent interview. Perhaps, but not him. Never him. That's what makes it so frightening. Because if someone like Slater could do this, it means any of us could overlook the clues. Would you have suspected someone within the department? Because in Lexington, for 22 long years, nobody did. Tell me in the comments, do you believe there were warning signs that should have been detected sooner? Could anyone have prevented this betrayal before it took a good man's life? Those same questions plague not only Lexington, but police forces nationwide. What started as a small-town cold case was now a national reckoning. A chilling reminder that occasionally the most devastating threat does not emanate from beyond the ranks, but rather from within. On a sunny June morning in 2020, the arrest of Daniel Slater progressed with subdued precision. The retired lieutenant walked out onto his boat dock, fishing rod in his hand, anticipating a peaceful day on the water. What he encountered was a group of FBI agents and Kentucky State Police. Slater displayed no reaction as agents closed in. Witnesses said, no panic, no denial, only calm. When the cuffs clicked, he didn't flinch. Neighbor Troy Wilkins, who observed from across the cove, said, no shock, no puzzlement, just acceptance. Like he'd been waiting all 22 years for this moment. But when the TV news crews rolled in, when those harsh lights hit his face, something would flicker, a momentary instant where the mask would falter. Then he was vanished, walked quietly out of there to a waiting car. Within hours, the arrest dominated national headlines. Cable networks cut into regular programming. True crime podcasts rushed out emergency episodes. Social media erupted. For many in Lexington, the feeling was complicated, a strange cocktail of relief and betrayal. Relief that justice, long delayed, had finally arrived, but betrayal so deep it left the entire city shaken. I worked alongside Dan for 15 years, retired officer Thomas Kendall said. We had dinner at one another's houses. Our children played together. To have him be able to look all of us in the face, having what he had done, that's the kind of thing that shatters your faith in people. Slater was taken to Kentucky State Penitentiary in protective custody, a routine precaution for former officers. In prison, he was eerily calm, not granting interviews and refusing to make statements at his arraignment. But outside the prison walls, investigators were just beginning. While detectives and federal agents delved deeper into Slater's finances, the extent of his corruption began to emerge. Between 1993 and 1998, Slater had secretly passed over $475,000 in unexplained cash through shell companies and offshore accounts. The money chain pointed directly to the Cabrera drug cartel, a mid-level trafficking organization that had controlled much of Kentucky's cocaine and methamphetamine trade during the 1990s. Slater wasn't receiving bribes, said FBI financial crimes specialist Amanda Torres. He was essentially serving as their inside man, their security director. He warned them about raids, guarded shipments, and destroyed investigations before they could close in. It was corruption on a scale Lexington never dreamed of. Evidence seized from Slater's properties painted a picture of a man who approached crime as a second career, with detailed documentation to prove it. Investigators discovered encrypted hard drives packed with leaked police operation plans with annotations, notes of precisely how intelligence had been fed into cartel contacts. Ledgers of payments were paid not only to Slater, but to at least 3 other officers, all of whom were now dead or long retired. And perhaps most astonishingly, agents found a series of audio recordings, recorded meetings between Slater and cartel middlemen. Recordings he'd made as insurance against treachery, but which would ultimately doom him in court. He was meticulous to the end, explained lead prosecutor James Morrison. Every meeting, every transaction, every detail, documented, cross-referenced, stored. It's as if he couldn't help treating his own corruption with the same diligence he once devoted to his police work. But one question still remained unanswered. What precisely had Merritt uncovered that made him a target? The answer lay in the now infamous notebook recovered from Slater's hunting property. In the last few weeks of his life, Merritt had been spending quiet afternoons poring over once dusty case files, drug raids, informant tips, and task force operations between 1994 and 1997. Initially, the breakdowns appeared to be bad luck. Informants gone missing, raids finding nothing, vital suspects who turned up hours before arrest. But Merritt saw a telling pattern. Each of the botched operations shared one thing in common. The same group of officers had access to the intelligence behind the operation. Merritt started mapping it out, creating what Detective Reed would later refer to as a matrix. He plotted which detectives had access to which files, Reed described at a press conference. He cross-referenced that with what investigations were blown. The overlap was unmistakable, and at the very center of Merritt's chart, at the hub of the wheel like a spider in a web, was Lieutenant Daniel Slater. Would you have noticed that link? Or would you have believed a man of 30 years' service, with an unblemished record and the regard of all those about him? Let me know in the comments. Could anyone have pierced the facade earlier? For as the tale of Detective Silas Merritt was soon to demonstrate, sometimes the toughest foe to identify is one carrying the same badge. One name kept appearing at the center of each unsuccessful investigation: Daniel Slater. By October of 1998, Detective Silas Merritt had gathered sufficient circumstantial evidence to legally initiate an internal affairs investigation. He even made a meeting with the district attorney for the day after he was murdered. In his briefcase, subsequently discovered to be empty in his patrol car, Merritt had typed a detailed report on it all: the suspicious patterns of cases, the financial discrepancies, and the lengthy roster of officers who could be implicated. But Merritt made one fatal error. 3 days prior to his murder, he logged into the department's firearms registry, inquiring about the status of Slater's reported stolen Glock pistol. Pulling the pin on a grenade was that digital search, said Detective Jordan. Slater had admin-level privileges on the system. He watched searches that might link him to something suspicious. The second Merritt searched for that gun, Slater knew. Since then, Slater knew time was running out. His dual existence, the career officer and the cartel informant, was seconds from being revealed. And so he moved. Phone records subsequently showed Slater had called Merritt on October 10, 1998, using a prepaid burner phone. The call itself lasted nearly 2 minutes. He invited them to meet in private, to talk about what he said was sensitive internal information. Merritt, decent and honorable to the bone, must have thought Slater was finally ready to emerge as a whistleblower. He consented to meet late on October 11th at a secluded part of Maple Creek Road. Slater played him to perfection, prosecutor James Morrison informed the jury. He understood Merritt's sense of responsibility. He understood that he would sit down and meet a fellow officer one-on-one to safeguard the reputation of the department, and that he would go alone. Forensic details would later reconstruct the unfortunate sequence of events. Merritt arrived first, leaving his patrol truck in a grove of trees along the creek. By 11:53 p.m., cell tower records put Slater's burner phone a mile from the location. Soil samples collected from Slater's truck afterward were found to match roadside soil where Merritt's corpse was discovered. The actual killing was quick, nearly surgical. Slater must have come to Merritt's window pretending to be talking, maybe leaning a bit forward to talk. Then suddenly he produced his stolen Glock and shot a single, careful shot at point-blank range. He then got in the car, took Merritt's notebook and cell phone, and wiped down every surface that he could have come into contact with carefully. He knew exactly how to clean a crime scene, explained forensic specialist Dr. Elizabeth Cohen. He wasn't guessing. He understood how evidence text worked, how to erase traces without disturbing the scene's natural appearance. It was chillingly professional, but what came after the murder may be the most disturbing part of all. Just hours after Merritt's body was discovered, Slater volunteered for the very task force investigating his death. He positioned himself as a mourning co-worker who was set on obtaining justice. He even asked to act as liaison to the Merritt family, which afforded him access to their messages and knowledge of what investigators were saying to them. He put himself smack in the middle of the investigation, said Lieutenant Harrison, who unwittingly worked alongside him. When any lead began to point towards him, he was there to deflect it. He ran the flow of information, the interviews, even the evidence logs. Slater took statements from potential witnesses. He read preliminary reports before they were filed to the case file. In short, he constructed the ideal deception. Years passed, and that illusion only grew stronger. He was hailed as the steadfast detective tormented by his friend's murder that had gone unsolved. He never missed a memorial service. He sent holiday greetings to Merritt's widow Maria. He taught young officers, frequently citing Merritt's sacrifice as an example of bravery and commitment. It was a masterclass in manipulation of the mind, said police psychologist Dr. Rebecca Foster. He didn't merely conceal his guilt. He rewrote history. He was the bereaved brother in arms. It's uncommon to witness such deception, even among experienced offenders. When police did raid Slater's house after his 2020 arrest, they found a locked room that shocked even experienced officers. Inside, all the walls were lined with newspaper articles on the Merritt case. Framed letter of commendation touted his persevering efforts to crack the case. Photos depicted him at memorial services, with his arms slung protectively around Maria Merritt. It was no longer about evading justice, Detective Reed said softly, gazing at the evidence board. It was about controlling the narrative, ensuring he'd be seen as the hero, not the murderer. Slater hadn't merely escaped with murder. For more than 20 years, he'd existed within the myth of his own deception. Would you have guessed it? A man who wept at vigils, who delivered speeches on honor, who consoled the widow of the victim he'd murdered? It makes you think, how much do we actually know about the people we trust most? He appeared to fuel on the hypocrisy itself, on the warped pleasure of being praised as the faithful friend, with full knowledge he was the murderer. It wasn't merely a matter of killing and escaping detection. It was about claiming the story, dictating the way everyone recalled both him and his victim. A 22-year power trip. As the case against him grew stronger, one question reverberated across Lexington and beyond. The explanation was partly in his reputation. Prior to Merritt's slaying, Slater was the quintessential officer. Decorated, disciplined, dedicated. A church worker, a family man, a mentor for new recruits. No one wanted to believe it could be Dan, said Captain Richard Winters, who worked alongside him. Even when the evidence became overwhelming, many of us just couldn't reconcile the man we thought we knew with the monster the investigation revealed. The second reason he kept himself concealed was much more sinister. He was perfectly aware of how not to get caught. Slater knew the procedure of investigations better than most criminals could ever hope to. He knew what detectives would expect, what behaviors would arouse suspicions, what timelines had to be ironclad. He had spent decades learning about the system, then converted that system into his tool. He didn't merely commit a murder, prosecutor James Morrison said in closing arguments to the jury. He took his badge, his training, and his brothers' and sisters' trust and used it as a weapon. And then he spent 22 years living in plain sight, watching his victim's family hurt and being feted as a hero. This is a betrayal of such magnitude, Morrison concluded, that our justice system must impose the worst possible punishment. Daniel Slater's trial opened up in March 2021, following pandemic-induced delays and motions before the trial. In order to secure an objective jury, proceedings were relocated to Franklin County Courthouse, but that failed to stem the tide of national publicity. The courthouse square became a media circus, satellite vehicles, cameras, and reporters occupying the streets. Local hotels were filled for the first time since COVID restrictions started. Restaurants remained open late for reporters, police, and family members who would not miss a day of testimony. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric, charged, tense, and weighed down by 22 years of sorrow. The prosecution's case took 6 weeks, meticulous and heartbreaking in its detail. 87 witnesses testified. More than 1,200 pieces of evidence were presented. FBI experts described the topographic bullet identification that linked Slater's Glock to the fatal bullet. Financial investigators tracked hundreds of thousands of dirty money back to cartel accounts. Former traffickers, now cooperating witnesses, testified to meetings, payments, and protection deals brokered through Slater. And throughout it all, the defendant remained impassive. He never blanched, remembered courtroom sketch artist Diane Parker. Not when his own colleagues testified. Not when they told how he killed his friend in cold blood. Not even when Merritt's kids burst into tears. He acted as if he was seeing a film about somebody else's life. The defense, anxious to cast doubt, went after the new ballistics technology, insisting that the FBI techniques were experimental and inconclusive. They floated another theory, that Merritt was killed by cartel hitmen who then blackmailed Slater into becoming an accomplice. But Morrison shot down that theory in minutes. If he was being blackmailed, Morrison paced in front of the jury, then why was Merritt investigating him prior to his death? Why did he conceal the murder weapon on his property? Why retain the notebook and the phone for 22 years rather than turning them in? The answer is straightforward. Daniel Slater murdered Silas Merritt to keep a secret. The jury deliberated just 7 hours. On April 18, 2021, the verdict was read into the record. First-degree murder, obstruction of justice evidence, tampering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, corruption under color of authority. 2 weeks later, during the sentencing hearing, the courtroom went silent as Maria Merritt, now in her late 40s, rose to confront the man who had ruined her life. Behind her were her 3 adult children. For 22 years, she started, her tone shaking but firm. You gazed at me and swore you were doing everything in your power to track down Silas's murderer. You sat at my table for dinner. You came to my children's graduations. You hugged me at memorials. And while doing so, you were the monster who stole him from us. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except Slater's. He never looked up once. After she concluded, Judge Eleanor Simmons pronounced the final verdict of the case. This court has never witnessed a greater betrayal of public trust, she stated. Daniel Slater, you are sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, plus 40 years for your other crimes. As Slater was escorted from the courtroom, the chains rattling on the floor, Maria Merritt whispered something to herself. Only 3 soft words the cameras scarcely picked up. You used your badge, Judge Simmons had told him, not only to commit crimes, but to taint the very system designed to prevent them. Those words resonated far beyond the courtroom. When word of the verdict reached Lexington, the town's response was multifaceted, a mix of relief, skepticism, and sadness. After 2 decades, the truth had finally emerged, but it was painful. Crowds gathered silently outside the police station. Candles were lit, flowers were left, and notes were slipped under the memorial plaque with Detective Merritt's name. Finding out it was Slater was like being punched in the gut, said longtime Lexington resident Howard Miller. This wasn't some outsider, some criminal we could easily hate. This was someone we trusted. It makes you question everything inside the Lexington Police Department. The revelation hit even harder. To many, Slater hadn't merely been a colleague. He'd been a mentor, a friend. Younger officers had grown up listening to tales of his unwavering commitment to cracking the Merritt case. Now those same tales tasted bitter. There was anger, confusion, betrayal, said Chief Anthony Davis. Officers were questioning their own judgment, wondering how they missed the signs and if they could ever trust their instincts again. The department embarked on a period of intense introspection. Chief Davis directed a thorough review of each case Slater had ever handled, particularly those dealing with the Cabrera cartel. What they found was sobering. Dozens of convictions were reviewed. Several were overturned because evidence was tampered with or procedure was manipulated. But something amazing followed. Change. Merritt's killing revealed cracks in the way we operated. Davis stated at a town hall gathering 6 months post-verdict, "We're now building from the ground up, with accountability and transparency at its core, so that no officer can ever again take advantage of this department's trust." Fresh reforms were formed. Routine forensic audits ensured evidence handling could never again be secretly manipulated. Rotating alliances were instituted so no detective could be alone or unaccountable. Officer accountings grew more stringent, with independent auditors checking officer accounts for discrepancies. Biometric security measures were introduced into evidence storage. Body cameras became department-wide policy. A safe, confidential reporting system was instituted for officers to report suspicious activity, even by superiors. It was, in the words of one retired sergeant, the biggest internal overhaul in Lexington police history. For the Merritt family, the verdict was justice, but not peace. Knowing the truth doesn't bring Silas back, Maria Merritt said to reporters after sentencing, but it means the man who took him from us will never hurt another family. Her children, now adults with families of their own, turned pain into purpose. In 2022, they established the nonprofit, the Detective Silas Merritt Foundation for Police Integrity to support whistleblowers and assist departments in making their anti-corruption policies more robust. Dad died because he wouldn't turn a blind eye to the truth, his daughter Sarah Merritt said during the foundation's opening. We want to ensure no one else needs to die for doing the right thing. That October, on the 23rd anniversary of Detective Merritt's killing, Lexington dedicated a permanent monument outside police headquarters. A bronze statue now stands there. Merritt in uniform, notebook in hand, eyes looking forward with quiet resolve. The inscription reads simply, "He sought truth, no matter the cost." The case has since become a national standard, taught in law enforcement academies, forensic programs, and FBI ethics classes nationwide. At a 2022 conference, FBI Director Christopher Palmer encapsulated its enduring legacy. What happened in Lexington could happen anywhere. The lesson isn't just about one corrupt officer. It's about building systems that resist corruption, systems where no badge is beyond scrutiny and no case is beyond solving. Before we close out this case, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to subscribe if you haven't yet. Each week, I publish cases such as Detective Merritt's, cases where justice took its time but never lost sight. Cases of truth piercing the darkness, of perseverance, and of the very human toll of crime. Your support allows me to continue doing all this work, presenting you with these stories, remembering the victims, and creating a community of individuals who think that every voice needs to be heard and every case needs closure. And while we're on the subject of community, I have a little question for you. How's the weather where you are today? Drop it in the comments below. It's always incredible to see this channel connect people from all over, different cities, different lives, yet all brought together by a shared belief in truth and justice. While you're typing that out, I'll be digging into our next case, because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.